This is Infotel Insights, an informational tech podcast presented by Infotel. For more than 40 years, leading enterprises around the world have been trusting Infotel with workload management to ensure service delivery on IBM ZOS.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Infotel Insights podcast. I'm Alex Perri, your host today, and I'm joined by two longtime tech experts, Morgan Attias and Tony Perri, to talk about data governance, records management, and why these are some of the most important topics to understand in today's business landscape. Morgan is an experienced consultant with a demonstrated history working in the information technology and services industry. He is an expert in digital and legal archiving solutions and is currently the pre-sales and product innovation manager for Infotel. Tony is the founder and CEO of Perri Marketing, Inc., a global technology marketing firm based in Chattanooga, Tennessee, catering to global software vendors that specialize in enterprise solutions for the Fortune 1000. In 2022, he became an IBM Champion for ZOS, one of just a few ZOS champions in the world. Perri Marketing is a consultancy in North America and has been partnering with Infotel for the last 3 years. Reuters is predicting 2023 will go down in history as marking the beginning of a profound shift in the philosophy underlying data privacy laws in the US. In the last decade, the EU has been the leader in this realm. But this year, 4 states, Colorado, Connecticut, Utah, and Virginia, will be enforcing new data privacy laws, inspired by California and the GDPR in the EU. Protecting, storing, and archiving data is becoming one of the most important issues in tech, and many of these new regulations will be asking U.S. firms to perform tasks they may have never had to do before. Starting off, Morgan, can you tell us a little bit about Infotel?
Yeah, so Infotel is over 40-year-old now company that's been providing software solution and consulting to various large clients. We come from the tech world, so we're very tech-focused and optimized on performance. And we try our best to help our clients to improve their data management system and to make sure that things are working smoothly for them. And we're here in the US. It's Infotel Corp, and it's based in Tampa, Florida. And that's a subsidiary of a French company, as you can hear from my accent.
Nice. And tell us a little bit more about your history with Infotel.
Well, it's quite a long history now. I've started Infotel about 12 years ago, and I started as a tech support level 1, so very low level. But with passion, work, and effort, I climbed up a little bit and focusing on advising clients. I became quite quickly a consultant, helping with different security, data governance, and archiving issues. And now I'm in charge of the product innovations, specifically for digital archiving, digital preservation, and data governance solutions within Infotel.
Thanks. So in your time with Infotel, how has data governance and compliance changed?
Well, compliance itself has always been there. You always have to comply for some regulations in general, but there's clearly been a focus on privacy and making sure that privacy is respected. We've seen the rise of the GDPR and how it has affected everybody. Of course, from the French background, we had some already heavy regulation that was inherited from the World War and all those terrible things that could be done with data that we did not want to have repeated. But clearly that landscape is now worldwide and not only in Europe, but you're also seeing it, of course, in the US and in other areas of the world in which privacy and who owns the data and who is allowed to do what with the data is very important. So it's become a challenge for individuals to make sure that their data is handled properly. It also becomes a challenge for companies to make sure that they can do what they need to do with data or what they want to do with data and without fearing any fines for mishandling that data. So and not only the fines, but also the relationship that companies have with their clients. So you don't want to give away your data to somebody that is misusing it or that is doing something that you don't want them to do. So It's all a balance between law, perception, and who owns the data.
Yeah, and if I could add, here in the U.S., we're seeing a lot of state regulations for protection of data and personally identifiable information for citizens, similar to what's going on in the EU. And the benefit of what they're doing in the EU is that it's a unified effort across the European Union. In the United States, we have 50 different states, and each state has different municipalities. What's happening in the United States is each state is creating their own data standard, and privacy and data protection standards are going to vary somewhat by state by state by state. So I think we're going to see some problems with interstate or intrastate regulations for data and how that's handled by privacy managers and data protection officers at these companies, because your data is rarely held in just one state. If you're in Alabama, you're going to have to understand the policies in Alabama, and if you're holding data for people in California, you're going to have to understand those too. So this is going to get quite complex in the U.S. in the coming years.
Yeah, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, Morgan, but I'd love for you to go a little more in depth about some of the differences you may have noticed in the US and in Europe when it comes to data protection. You touched on the impact that World War II had in Europe specifically when it comes to privacy, but I'd love to hear more about your perspective on that, considering as North Americans, we might not have that experience.
Yeah, I think there are things that from an European standpoint are almost crazy to handle, to hear, because the amount of freedom that you have with the way you handle data is sometimes scary, because you have some crazy examples, and there have been leaks of data that technically were legal, if you think, considering early almost scandals with Facebook, for example, where all that data, personal data, was used commercially without the people's knowledge. Still legal, so that works. But that's where we go into the area of which you have a relationship with your users and your client, and if the trust is not there, you're going to have issues. So I think there's a lot more freedom into what you can do with the data. In the same way, you can legally pay to search online for somebody's phone number and have information about this, and you have all the credit score system that is in place, which would sound completely crazy to Europeans because that just doesn't add up. But I mean, historically, it makes sense. There's a lot of business relationships that are based on those systems.
So let me ask something as well, Morgan. When GDPR came out, the standard was there. People kind of understood it. They really didn't pay a lot of attention to it until somebody got a really big fine, and that took a few years. And so, one thing I've learned over the years working in tech is that people aren't going to do a whole lot about their enterprise software and hardware environments until the government or some industry regulation tells them they have to. And so, given that the GDPR has been in Europe for a few years before we started seeing some of these things prop up in the United States, do you see more urgency in Europe for data protection and privacy than you do in the U.S.? And do you think the U.S. could be maybe catching up to Europe just because of the penalties and the mandates by government and industry that are there, trying to adhere as best as they can to the GDPR?
I mean, it's possible that there is going to be some catch up between the two. But one thing already is that you have companies, American companies, that have been impacted quite heavily, because we've seen the likes of Google and Amazon and Facebook getting huge fines already because they were not following GDPR. And at a company level, if you have to implement those data protection mechanisms, you might as well do it for all the data. In a way, it's quite similar to what Apple had to do with their USB chargers, that the European Union has mandated that all chargers should be USB-C. And so now the iPhone is going to use USB-C, even in the US. So I think there's that relationship that makes it happen that way. So mechanically, because those large companies will have to handle that for European market, then they will have to do it. They will mechanically do it for the US market as well. And then I think we already see it. I think California for that is really at the cutting edge, because the CCPA is quite different but very similar to the GDPR, and there are fines that are going to come. Some of them have come, and so this will again force large companies to comply. Otherwise, they're going to take a risk. And you can always do the risk calculation. Okay, if I keep using the data because it has some business meaning to me, how much it is going to cost me if I get caught misusing it? I don't know. Maybe it works out, but probably it won't. So you'll have to put in place those mechanisms.
Good point.
Yeah, in the US, we're seeing more of an emphasis on privacy, and events are popping up. Can you talk a bit more? Maybe we're using some of these words: data privacy, data governance, data archiving. Can you talk about how privacy fits into data governance, and then maybe differentiate some of those terms for people who might be unfamiliar with them?
Yeah. So okay. So the data governance is really the whole field as who controls the data and what is done with that data. So you want to make sure that you don't just have a blob of information. You want that information to be usable, but you also want to make sure that you know who's accountable for it. So that field is going to say, okay, I have this person that has the custody of that data and that can do this and that with that information. Then as part of the data governance, you're going to have some mechanisms in place which are going to be attached to the legal aspects of handling the data. So that's when you come into the world of records. What is information that you legally need to keep, and for how long? So there are durations of how long you need to keep that data, and then who has to have access to it. So that's where you have information such like a Freedom of Information Act. So you can request information about any kind of things that are public related. And so you have to have rules to make sure you identify what the data is, and if it is indeed a record, and then how long you need to keep it, and then what do you do after you have kept it for that long. Sometimes that's where it becomes archive, and it needs to be kept for much longer period of time. In here, you have to make sure you don't confuse because archive with backup. Often in the personal life, we just say, okay, I put that in a zip file, it's archive. Not quite. This would be a backup. You keep it and you save it somewhere. Archive is really more about preserving the data for a very, very long time. And with the advent of the digital world, we've seen more and more archive that is purely digital. So it used to be that, archive, you imagine those big boxes full of files that are kept in Indiana Jones warehouse with all those information. It used to be that there's still some of this. Of course, the physical world is still very present, but nowadays the digital world, so documents that were never actually physical, are growing and growing, and it brings more challenges as well as to how do you keep those digital documents to make sure that they are still accessible. And that's where digital preservation comes in, and all the fun that is associated with it. And most people don't realize how actually important this is. But I guess the easiest example is if you have a friend, or if you're a geek yourself and you're playing video game, you'll know right away that the video game you had 10 years ago, physically speaking, the gaming console is just not even available anymore. Well, maybe more than 10 years, but if you're playing with a Game Boy, it's very rare to still have one that is fully working and have all the collections of the games. So you have to use some other mechanisms in order to still have access to these things. So it's easy to see it with video games, but it also happens with all kind of technologies that are much different, but the physical aspect. So if you're thinking VHS, it's hard now to find a place to play a VHS. You're no longer you're able to view those videos, or Betamax and all those technologies that have content but are no longer easily accessible. So you need to transform it. You need to have some mechanisms in place to make sure that you can still view the information. So that's the word of digital preservation. So that's where you have the legal aspects, the control over your data, and then the way you can keep it for an extended amount of time to make sure that it's still available and still usable. So all those worlds are mixing. They're associated with data, deciding what you can do with data, and how long and how you can keep it.
Yeah, so you mentioned how this is important when it comes to maybe for legal reasons, for evidentiary value. Could you provide an example, maybe, especially when it comes to some of this new data privacy and these regulations coming through, why it would be so important to make sure that we can access some of these archives in the modern age?
Yeah, so I can actually give you two examples that are a little bit opposite and the same. The first one is basically we have had a client that was archiving invoices, and somebody somewhere came up with another PDF document that looked exactly like an invoice, except the numbers were changed. So how do you prove that you have the original document and that the other document is fake? Well, you have to have in place a solution that will show that you have full custody of the data that was generated, and that too you can show that it was never tampered with, and you can show the whole history of that file. And so that's where this client was able to do. So they had the inquiry, they had a subpoena, and they had to show that the information was accurate, and they were able to show that they have the whole history and that the file was indeed not a real file that was generated by that company. So that's one way to show that you have the original, to prove that you have the right document and that the other one is being manufactured. And the other way around came with the idea that somebody had not deleted documents. And this is where it's interesting, because when you think about it, how do you prove that you have deleted something? It's like, okay, I don't have it anymore. Yeah, but it's like, prove it to me that you've deleted it. It's like, well, again, you can show through proper software solution and custody of that data that you had it, and you have traces and logs and journals and technical elements that shows that you had the document and that you've properly disposed of it. And this is one of the things that we help our clients to handle, is like actually have a system that is able to record all to keep all the documents, have a retention period to make sure that the legal aspect is maintained, and then when it has to be deleted, show that it is actually deleted, and show that everything is working properly. And that's for like the really business-oriented aspects, because that's where you have your record, your legal aspects. And of course, the other way around would be, if you have archive that you want to keep forever, you make sure it's not modified and it's not deleted. So it's that way we're juggling a little bit with the data. And usually that's where we deal with larger companies that have both the legal requirements and the actual almost historical requirements or patrimonial requirement. They want to keep that data because they've created things that they want to use for a very long time. And then you create something new from something old, and you want to go back to the history of everything you've done. So you want to make sure you have proper custody and maintenance of your data.
Oh, great answer, Morgan. Let me also ask you. You had mentioned a couple of times for a very long time, and if the GDPR's roots go back to World War II, and probably before that, I think probably out of the 30s, 1930s. But what is considered a long time? If you think about digital archives, that's not so old. But then when you start talking about digitizing old documents, what is considered with your clients a long time in archiving?
It's I like to joke that it's like the same thing as the price of a plane ticket. Uh, Everybody has a different version of what a long time is. So sometimes 2 years is considered a long time, and sometimes it's 100 years or more. So it really depends on what mission people have. So I would say in the records management world, long time is usually 5 to 15 years. In the archiving world, it might be just hundreds of years. There are national archives that have documents that are so old it's hard to wrap your head around it. Yeah.
In terms of digitization and electronic archives, what are you seeing from customers and their requirements for how long to keep data?
Yeah, so here again, I have to make the distinction between the purely legal requirements. So in here you have specific legal duration. So there's no question about it. You have to keep for 5 or 7, 10 years, and then this will going to change depending on the local law. But for digital preservation in the archiving world or digital preservation world, it usually is something that is going to be, for the scientific aspect, you're going to have some mid-long term, which could be 10 to 20 years. And this is usually when you have research or the results of some experiments that are happening and you want to keep all that technical data. But often you also get forever. And forever is a very long time. So that's the type of preservation period that you might have. So it is quite challenging because if you think about the way it works is it's never just you save the data and let it sit. In order to keep it for a very long time, it actually has to move, which is sometimes surprising, but there is currently no physical media that will hold data forever. And sometimes even 10 years is a bit of a challenge. So the data is always in motion, even though it's quote unquote dead data, if it's purely archived or it's not very often accessed. It still has to move and migrate and keep up in order to make sure that it's still accessible and that it's physically, even if it's not changing at all, it's physically accessible. So it's going to move because of the way it's recorded and saved.
Yeah, just talking about, we're talking about digital data, physical data. We're talking about time periods of, forever. This is a huge scale of information we're talking about. And when it comes to a large organization, I can imagine that it's difficult to manage, especially when you have IT teams that might be small, but having, these large asks of them, access this thing that's years and years old. So the question coming to my mind is, how are large organizations going to handle that? We've seen, that it's often the case that there's dysfunction that comes from some of the silos in a large organization. What can be done to bring different departments in an organization together to help manage and control this information so that it's more of a team effort?
Well, that's a big challenge. That's a big challenge.
Yeah.
It is very true that unfortunately, it's sometimes it almost gets personal with data, even though it's not personal data. But it's like it's my data. I produced it. I've put a lot of effort and a lot of work into it, and maybe it's giving me an edge on what I'm doing. Why would I release it and put it with somebody else, even if it's within the same company? So you have a little bit of that aspect. Then you also have the generic of I don't have time and I don't have money to handle it. So this usually is the worst case scenario because this leads to duplication of data or some network drive somewhere or have a lot of data stored on a laptop or some small computer and spread out everywhere. And it is a nightmare to handle because you still need to handle the data privacy requirements that you have, the legal requirements for preservation and organizing. So if you don't know where your data is, what your data is, you're in a heap of trouble. And in that case, it becomes very expensive to actually fix that, because you need to spend a lot of time analyzing the data. You need to spend a lot of time sorting it out. And then if there is some legal requests, like, okay, give me all the information about this, and that's a legal requirement, you just don't even know where it is. You might just pour in more information. So in this aspect, you need to have a solution to organize your data, and you need to have the proper tools to help you maintain that. And the way you buy in some of the people that would not want to do it, or don't want to change the habit that they have, and they're changing, is by bringing more. And this is something that we try to do, because when it comes to record management or digital archiving, there are norms and requirements, and you have to be compliant. Yeah, that's a given. Any solution that is going to provide you with that is going to allow you to make it easier to be compliant. But it's like being compliant doesn't bring anything. You need to have more. Either make it easier, make it more powerful, get more from your data. And this is one of the things. If you have the proper system, then you can look for the data faster. You can access it faster. You can find some correlations between different documents that you had no idea. And you can then optimize. And the last element is financial. If I'm storing X time the data in different servers, and it's not organized, and I'm not rationalizing my costs, I have to create backups of things I don't even know if they are ever used. So making sure you streamline, you have one rule into how you organize your data, where it is stored, safely stored, have multiple copies to make sure that nothing happens. You have those copies, but make sure you have only what you need based on the risks that you're taking if you're losing that data. And so rationalizing, putting everything into one system or less systems makes it easier to handle, and so it gives the user an easier way to handle. So IT is not going to have to manage so many storage solutions. The people that are actually using the data will know exactly where it is and how to access it, and so the business is just going to work smoother around that. And legal department is going to be happier as well, because, okay, give me the information about this, there you have it. No questions, no issues, so it's all good.
So Morgan, if I could just add and maybe get your input on another tangential item from what you just talked about. You and I go to a few conferences every year together. A lot of them records information management, information governance type conferences. And when we talk to people, the icebreaker question I always ask them is, "Hey, how you doing? What are you working on?" And we get these descriptions of I'm doing this and this and this and this and this in records management, and I say, wow, that sounds like your team is really busy. And they'll go, well, the team is just me, or me and one other person. So it seems like these people have daunting tasks and quite limited resources to do all these things, and I'm sure high expectations of them. How are they getting on? Are they using more technology automation? What's your insight working with your customers when you're deploying these types of tools?
Well, first of all, I'm tip my hats to most of the people I'm talking to, handling so many things at the same time and asked to do so many things. And sometimes, regulation changes, new law comes in and says, oh, you have to do that too now. And it's like, it's crazy, the amount of things that some people are required to do, sometimes much more than they actually can. But yeah, in those type of situation, I think the easiest is try to show the value that handling the data properly brings. Show most of the time how much it reduces risk. And this is where the big fines are coming in, because when there's big money behind it, then usually we want to solve it. But yeah, I think some of the solutions with technology might come with automation, might come with some workflow mechanisms in order to make sure that they only do what they have to do, and that they don't mix with what IT would have to do or legal would have to do, and they're more of a centralizing element. And sometimes the new technologies are coming in virtually every day. So we could see some element with AI that could potentially help, even though it can be quite tricky. We see a lot of issues with it, but it might help sorting out some of the data. And then it's really working with more advanced automated mechanisms that will just help them do the things that have lower value. You want to keep the brain in and let the computer do the groundwork, basically.
Good point. And I think the other thing that you hit on there was collaboration and getting out of your work silos and making sure that nobody else is working on something you've been asked to work on. And, that goes up to the highest levels of the organization where people are asking for things. And so good point.
Yeah. It sounds like both of you have a lot of experience in this area of expertise. I'm wondering, Morgan, do you have any horror stories you could share of what not to do of organizations that may have not heeded this advice?
I have a few examples that come to mind. Some of them that we repeat to one another within the team. I remember a client in a very panic mode. So it's like they had actually lost data. They were migrating from a former system, moving into a new system, and there was the head of the company, and there was a big thing because they had lost data. And the guy that was in charge of the product was just saying, or the former product was saying, well, we had guaranteed that you could archive. We never said you could retrieve. And it was just like, it did not work out very well for that person, which did not stay with that company very long after that. But yeah, so the lesson learned here is, you want to make sure you have the right methods in place to archive your things, but you need to make sure that you account for how it's going to happen if there is a disaster. If you're losing storage servers, what are your procedures in place, making sure you're ready, because it might happen. And if it happens, if you've trained before, you will have a better time. That's one that comes as a mantra, I think, whenever we see somebody that never tries their disaster recovery mechanisms. We have that one in mind. And then the other one was a little bit trickier, but I think it happens more often than not. Was mapping out the data of the company to make sure that they knew exactly where the data was and who it was being handled by. And they were specifically looking to improve their compliance with GDPR and looking at personally identifiable information. And they've gone through a whole audit and the whole mapping, and we're helping them with that. And they had streamlined, removed some of the different instances to put everything within the system. And at some point, at the end of the audit, we have somebody that's like, oh, what's on those servers over there? And there were like a bunch of tower computers in a back room. And it's like, what's this? And it's all plugged to the network. What's going on here? And it's just shadow IT, basically a team that was like, I'm not going to bother with all the extra security. It's hampering me from working. And they had copied a large amount of data, and they were using Excels, and they're using things that are all full of personally identifiable data, not backed up, not controlled by anything. And so this is where like, no, please don't. I know sometimes security is annoying. IT can sound like they're just nagging you, but no, you have to talk with them. Again, I think we're going back to the idea that come out of your silo, explain to the other people why what they're asking you to do is just either not possible or too much of a hassle. And so try to find out solutions. Don't build shadow IT. It's not gonna work out. It's not worth it. Yeah.
Great stories.
Yeah, that sounds risky. So jumping off of that, what are some success stories that you could share in cases where organizations have implemented technology and it's worked out beautifully for them.
Yeah, I think one of the latest we had that was quite interesting is that, again, they were handling a lot of files, a lot of invoices, and they had analyzed their system. They had a CRM that was holding some copies of those invoices. They had a web portal that allowed their clients to go and access those invoices. So they had another copy of those invoices. They had the record management system that had other copies of the same invoices, and they had an archiving system because sometimes they would moving to archive, and then they had the backup system to keep all of that going. So they were paying solution and different elements, or licensing and storage and multiple instances of all. And it's like, why, if it's the same data and it's not moving, it's just literally the same files, why do we have so many instances, and then we have to clean it up, and it's different teams and it's different hardware, and it's like crazy. What can we do to make this easier to handle and more affordable? And that's where we came in, and we helped them get all the data into the single system that is Arxis, was our solution. And they were able to access directly for all of those different systems. They were able to access the data right away. This did force us to change the product a little bit to make sure that the performance was still on par with what they were expecting. So we had to make it much more performant for some of the elements. But now they have one system that has one instance of the invoices with multiple backup that are completely piloted, but they have the minimum requirement of copies and the minimum requirement of systems in order to handle all of their invoices. So it makes it cheaper and easier to handle.
Very nice. And on the security side, why would having just one instance of those pieces of information be important?
So for the security aspects, purely access. So you have one way to control. So if you have 150 doors to get into your house, you have to close and make sure that the 150 doors are secure. If you have one door, you can make sure that this one door is properly secured, and right away if somebody comes through, so it's easier to handle a single solution to have all the accesses in there. And then from the security aspect, if you're thinking only one, that's a risk, because if I'm losing that one access, then what happens? Well, I'm cheating a little bit by saying just one. The system actually has multiple copies of the data, and it's separated physically, so you don't want to, if something happened in a physical location, you still have the data on the other hand. And I mean, I guess to go back a little bit on the success story, we also had cases in which, unfortunately, nowadays it's very common to have the crypto locking attacks. So you have some people coming in, some hackers, and they're just getting into your system, and they're encrypting your data, and then they say, okay, now you have to pay. If you don't pay, you're not getting your data. And with one of our clients, this has happened. So they had corrupted one instance of the data. So all of that was partially encrypted. And then Arxis was able to see, okay, there's something wrong with the data. It's been modified. It's not supposed to move. And so it has alerted the client that there was something wrong. But because there are silos that are separating the data in different networks, it's different elements without going too much into the details or technical details, there was some separation which allowed data to be recovered with the multiple copies, because one of the copy was corrupted, but the other copies were still fine. And so as soon as the issue that had allowed in some hackers into the system was resolved, and that they were sure that nobody could access it anymore, they were able to go into Arxis and say, okay, just recover it. And the copies were made, and so the data was recovered. So it does have the help of that system that is centralized, but that has that replication and those mechanisms in place, does help in terms of security to make sure that you don't lose your data, because that's the primary functionality. You have data, you want to put it in the hand of the software so that it's not modified and it's not lost. So that's the whole point.
Yeah. So on top of kind of saving money when it comes to storage costs, you're minimizing risk that may occur from a data breach or non-compliance with some kind of regulation.
Yeah, that's the same thing.
And I think in addition to that, you're also providing an audit trail or some type of mechanism for understanding what's happening with the data once they ask you to do something with it. And you mentioned the product one or two times, ArcSys. Can you just talk, maybe give us a 30,000-foot overview of this product that you mentioned?
Yeah, so it's actually an all-in-one solution for record management, digital archiving, and digital preservation. The idea is to be able to put data in, a lot of data in, as a bulk action, or it could be a little bit of data as a human interaction through a web interface. And then you set all the properties that you have around that data. So how long you want to keep it, what information allows you to search for it and retrieve it, how it should be displayed, and all those elements. And then what should happen after retention period has arrived. So should it be deleted safely? Should it be transferred somewhere else? So that's the whole product. So it allows you to handle the data and make sure it's kept safely and that you can show that it was not tampered with. And this is where the long time thing. So it's been in production for over 15 years now. And so it is a long time when you come into the digital world, and we've seen document being transferred and modified and those life cycle coming in and what happened after 5 years, what happens after 10 years, and what you can do with it. So that's the shortcut version of what the product is.
Great, thank you. I think it's important to provide some context for what you mean by a lot of data, just for the audience that might not know what the volume of some of the data that you're dealing with. What do you consider big, a lot of data, quote unquote?
Yeah, so I think the smallest clients that we have archive about 500 gigabytes a year. So that's tiny in terms of data. And the larger ones, we're going to talk about petabytes. So it's really more volume. And then the other thing that you need to take into account is not just size, also the number. So sometimes you have a lot of files. So we're going to have clients that have upwards of 200 billion documents. And when you reach those numbers, there are a lot of things you have to take into consideration. It's just not everything happens right away. You have to handle that volume. So searching for a document, accessing a document, retrieving, and all that is not the same as if you have 1,000 documents, obviously.
Right.
So yeah, so that's the thing, and we thrive in coming up with clever solutions for those very large and sometimes exotic cases. So, and to come back to the size, we also handle master movies, and those can be very large. We're talking about files that can be up to terabytes of data for one file. And again, that is a challenge. You don't manipulate those files like you would any Word document. You have to make sure that the integrity is good, that you're transferring it properly, that you're copying it properly. All of that makes it, again, a challenge, a technical challenge that we like to solve.
That when you said 200 billion files, that's billion with the B, it just in the back of my mind, I'm thinking that sounds like an indexing nightmare.
But it's fun. That's where because you do have to some cases to handle those documents, and sometimes you have some requirements in which I need to have my document within half a second because somebody has to make something out of the information that is contained in it. I mean, we have, and not to go to the details, but specifically, I'm thinking of a client in Belgium. In Belgium, what they have is that all the um, doctor's notes and the prescriptions, it's all digital. There's no physical doctor's notes for a prescription. And that means that the system that is handling this better be responding right away, because if I need medication, it might be life or death. So you want to make sure that there's a crazy uptime because you want the information if you need any medication. So if you're considering how many prescription notes you might get in the size of a country, and how quickly and safely you need to keep that data, that's the kind of challenge we like and we handle.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. So looking towards the future, what is in the roadmap for this product, Arxis, and its counterpart, RVCham, that you're working towards?
Yes, actually, yeah, I didn't mention the fact that there's two names. Arxis is in Europe, and RVCham is in North America. It is essentially the same product, but different flavor to customize it a little bit, and there's some copyright element to it. But what's in the future? Well, a lot of evolutions and a lot of innovations. That's my day job, so that's what I like to look at. So basically, just to explain a little bit precisely what I'm doing, I go on conferences and different events, and I go to see the clients as well. And I'm always looking at, what are your problems? What are your challenges? What are your pain points? Like, what is so annoying to you and you have to do it every day? So I gather that, and then I crunch in with a bunch of very smart people here, and it's like, okay, what can we do to make that better, or to make that easier, or to make that pain go away? So we try to find some clever ways to do that. I think one of the latest example is we have most of our new clients, obviously they are moving away from a previous solution. And moving from a previous solution and putting the data into a new solution is really long and painstaking process, because you have to change the format, you have to move the data physically to another element and everything. And so we were trying to think, okay, what can you do about this? And it's like, what if we don't move the data? And so there are some specific cases in which, instead of moving over the data to the new system, we can just say, okay, the data is there. Check that it's there, but you don't have to move it. So trying to ease up the things. So that's something that we've done fairly recently. And in the future, we're looking at the ones that are coming up right away. We're looking at improving those audit trails that Tony mentioned earlier. We had some very technical audit trails. We had a little bit less technical audit trails. And now we want to move in and have like human audit trails. So that somebody that doesn't necessarily know what an archiving system is or what a records management system is can go and see, okay, I understand what happened here. We had that operation here. We had that thing. I can see what happened with that document. I can see what happened, what the user did throughout that period of time. And that allows somebody that is not from the technical world to get a good understanding of what the system has done and what everything that has happened within that system. And the idea here was, the idea here was that we had some legal people that were coming in and says, okay, you're giving me that info, but I need some tech expert to explain it to me, because otherwise I don't know what's happening. So it is annoying because I cannot find out by myself if something was wrong or not, and it's hard to read. So again, here the idea was, okay, we're going to make your job easier. And you're now going to be able to handle that by yourself without having any prior knowledge of that specific software solution that we're providing. So that's one of the elements. And then in the future, we'll still try to find solution to optimize in terms of performance and scaling. And then in terms of that motion that I mentioned earlier, the data is kept for a very long time, but it has to move. So we're trying to make that movement a little bit smoother. So when we have to convert, or we call that format migration, when we have to convert the files so they can still be readable. We try to make this easier of a process. We try to find more customizable ways to access the information and to make it more easier to match with what the person has to do for their specific job. So that's where we're heading.
And I think you made a couple of really good points there in talking about non-IT disciplines needing access and management of data. You know, with one of the latest findings that you and I had when we went to a most recent privacy conference is legal teams being asked to come up with privacy policies and maintain that within some type of technology system. And I think that's very new. I think before that, we were seeing a lot of chief marketing officers being asked to take data and monetize it. And so, you know, we're seeing even greater need now for collaboration and getting out of silos and working across silos with not just the creation of data, but the management of it. And so it sounds like you're building some of that ability to do that within the software.
Nice. That's exciting stuff. Are there any parting comments that we didn't get to earlier in our conversation?
I think from my end is a bit repeating what I said. If you see me at an event, even if you have everything you need in terms of software solution, I want to hear your problems and your pain points. First of all, because it feels good to get it out of your bag, so that's good, and also because it gives me a better real life understanding of what the issues are. And chances are, if you have an issue, somebody else probably has the same issue. So if I can solve it, maybe not for you, if you don't want to go through with our solutions, I can solve it for somebody else. So that's all good.
Good. And where could someone find more information about these products?
Oh, well, that's on our website. That would be the first point. And the website is insoft-infotel.com. And otherwise, get in touch from here, I guess. Whatever you hear, we'll give you some info to contact us.
Great. And on insoft-infotel.com, you can find an events page that has all of the upcoming events and past events that we've been to. And look forward to you coming to the United States again, Morgan, for another conference and spending some time with you and the team.
Great. Well, thank you both.
Thank you for joining us for another podcast presented by Infotel. For more information about Infotel and its products, please visit insoft-infotel.com.